"Sir, you need to go now." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. The restaurant's jazz faded beneath the sound of her heartbeat, echoing louder than the music, louder than reason. Keisha Williams, a tired black waitress with one shift left before rent was due, stood frozen beside the corner booth of the Avellini, Chicago's most exclusive dining room. Across from her sat Ethan Cole, a white CEO worth nearly $1 billion. The kind of man whose shoes cost more than her month's wages. The kind of man who didn't look up when people like her spoke. But tonight, he did. Keisha's hands shook around the water glass. 5 minutes ago, she'd heard two men whispering near the coat room about data transfers, offshore accounts, and something big about a flip before Monday. She hadn't meant to listen, but when one of them said Ethan's name, her stomach dropped. It wasn't gossip. It was sabotage. She'd almost stayed silent. After all, silence had always been safer, especially for someone like her. But her grandfather's words burned in her head. Doing right ain't always safe, baby, but it's always right. Now she was here, standing in front of the most powerful man in the building, risking everything for a truth she couldn't unhear. "Excuse me?" Ethan looked up, brows narrowing in disbelief. Keisha swallowed hard. "I know how this sounds, sir, but someone's planning to ruin you tonight. I heard them. They said your name." The room seemed to tilt. Forks paused midair. A few guests turned, sensing tension but pretending not to notice. Ethan studied her, calculating, skeptical, but not dismissive. Something in her eyes stopped him from brushing her off. Fear, but also conviction. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but if you don't leave now, you might lose everything." A long, dangerous silence followed. Her throat burned, her palms slick with sweat. And still, she didn't look away. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains of Keisha's small apartment, painting faint stripes across a cluttered table. A pile of unopened bills waited beside her mother's pill organizer, and the silence of an unpaid power bill hummed faintly in the background. She poured her mom's medicine into a glass of water and whispered, "You'll be okay, Mama. I just need a few more shifts." Her mother smiled weakly. "You work too hard, baby." Keisha kissed her forehead. That's what daughters do. By 5 p.m., the scent of bleach and perfume filled the restaurant locker room. Keisha fixed her apron in the mirror, muttering a quiet prayer. Tonight wasn't just another shift. It was the night the richest man in Chicago would dine in her section. Ethan Cole, founder of a billion-dollar tech empire, whose face was on magazines and billboards across Michigan Avenue. Her manager, Mr. Bradley, stormed in with his usual arrogance. "New linens, Section 7 spotless." "Don't embarrass this place, Keisha." "Smile, but not too much. And for God's sake, keep your accent soft tonight." She bit the inside of her cheek. "Yes, sir." Bradley smirked. "That's better. Remember, our guests can feel tension. We sell calm." By 7, the Avellini glowed with quiet wealth. Chandeliers hung like halos, jazz trickled through the air, and every glass reflected power. Keisha moved carefully between tables, every step rehearsed, every smile timed. At table 7, Ethan Cole sat with two men in tailored suits, their laughter too loud, too sure. He barely noticed her placing water on the table. But when his gaze flicked up for a second, she saw something in his eyes. Not cruelty, not warmth, just distance. The look of someone too high above to ever imagine falling. Her co-worker Malik whispered as he passed, "That's the one, right? The guy who could buy the whole city." "Yeah," Keisha replied quietly, and never even noticed its burning. The hours crawled. Orders came, tips didn't. Her feet ached. Her mind drifted to her mother's medicine drawer. 1 week left before the refill ran out. She couldn't afford a single mistake tonight. Not one glass, not one wrong word. But fate, as it always does with people like her, was already waiting. In the quiet corner near the coat room, where two voices would soon change everything. The night carried that fake peace only rich places have, the kind that hides chaos behind dim lights and violin music. Keisha wiped the edge of a wine glass near the coat room, her body aching. her mind half on her mother's empty pill bottle. That's when she heard them. Two men, sharp suits, whispering like snakes. "Monday we trigger the flip," one said. "The CEO signs tonight. Data moves before he even knows it." The other man chuckled low. "He trusts us. That's the fun part." Keisha froze, breath held, the stem of a glass balanced in her hand. Her heart pounded. Ethan Cole. They'd said his name. She leaned just an inch closer, enough to catch another phrase. "Offshore, rebrand. His empire becomes ours." Her elbow brushed a shelf. The glass slipped, fell, and shattered, a sharp scream of sound slicing the quiet. Both men turned. "Who's there?" Keisha bolted. Her shoes slid on marble, heartbeat louder than her breath. She darted into main hall, only to run straight into Mr. Bradley. He caught her by the arms. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her chest heaved. I dropped a glass, sir. Running through the dining room." His voice dripped venom. "This isn't some diner on the south side. Sweetheart, you want to work here? Act like you belong here." She tried to steady her breathing. "I'm sorry, sir." Bradley leaned closer, his cologne thick enough to choke. "You're lucky we're full tonight. You break one more thing, you're gone. Understand?" "Yes, sir." He smirked. "Good. Now get back out there and smile. You people always forget that part." Those two words, "you people," burned hotter than the sting of his tone. Keisha forced a nod, turned away, and walked toward the kitchen, her palms trembling. She could have stayed quiet, pretended she heard nothing. That's what everyone did when powerful men broke rules. Stay invisible, survive the night. But something in her heart refused. Her mother's words echoed, soft but fierce. "Don't let fear feed silence." Keisha looked toward table 7. Ethan Cole sat calm, untouched, unaware that his empire was one whisper away from collapse. Her breath caught. Then, steady now, she fixed her apron and started walking toward him. "If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." The clink of crystal faded as Keisha approached table 7, every step echoing like a countdown. Her voice barely rose above a whisper when she spoke. "Sir, please don't panic, but I think someone in your circle is planning something against you tonight." Ethan Cole looked up from his tablet, confusion flickering into irritation. "Excuse me?" She leaned in slightly, careful not to draw attention. "Two men near the coat room. They mentioned your name and something about transferring data overseas after you sign a deal." He studied her face, cold and composed. "You're telling me this because I overheard it, and because silence already cost my family once." A flicker of something, not belief, not yet, but awareness, passed through his eyes. He set his glass down slowly. "What's your name?" "Keisha," she said, voice steady now. He nodded once, then without another word, typed something on his phone. The silence that followed was heavier than the chandeliers above them. For one moment, she thought he might thank her. Instead, his tone flattened. "You should get back to work." Her stomach dropped. "He doesn't believe me." She turned away, heat rising in her chest, shame, fear, anger, all at once. Back in the kitchen, the storm came fast. Mr. Bradley burst through the door, face red. "What did you say to Mr. Cole?" Keisha froze. "Nothing, sir, I just..." "Don't lie to me. You were whispering at his table like a fangirl. You think flirting with a billionaire gets you ahead." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't flirting. I was trying to help." He slammed the tray down, plates rattling. "Help? The only thing you're helping is unemployment statistics. If that man walks out unhappy, you're done here." Every cook, every waiter froze mid-motion. No one spoke. No one defended her. Keisha forced herself to meet his glare. "If speaking up gets me fired, then so be it." Bradley's face twisted. "You'll regret that tone." Maybe she would. Maybe tomorrow she'd lose this job and the apartment too. But tonight, something bigger than fear kept her standing tall. She turned, smoothed her apron, and whispered to herself, Doing right ain't always safe, but it's still right. That night, rain streaked the windows of Cole Industries, washing the city lights into long silver trails. Inside the top floor, Ethan Cole sat in his glass-walled office, replaying Keisha's trembling voice in his mind. They said your name, something about transferring data after you sign. It should have been nonsense. Servers were secure, contracts verified. He'd built this company on precision. But something about her eyes, the fear mixed with certainty, wouldn't let him sleep. Caleb, he called his assistant, pull up every file on the merger, line by line. Caleb blinked. Sir, it's nearly midnight. Now. Minutes later, data projections filled the air like ghost blue light. Ethan scrolled through endless clauses until one buried paragraph made his blood run cold. Temporary administrative access window, 72 hours post-signature. He frowned. That wasn't standard. It meant whoever inserted it would control his servers for 3 days before anyone could legally intervene. Caleb's voice trembled. That's a breach clause disguised as technical support. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who wrote it? Dean Mather's legal team. The name hit like thunder. Dean, his longtime partner, the man sitting beside him at that restaurant hours ago, had drafted the very clause that could destroy him. Run a trace. Ethan ordered, see where their backup servers point. A few keystrokes later, Caleb exhaled. Sir, 2 IPs registered overseas. One in Zurich, one in Dubai. Ethan stood. So the waitress was right. Silence filled the office. For years, he'd trusted numbers, not people. Yet the only person who'd warned him, the one he almost ignored, was a woman his manager had likely insulted for speaking. He grabbed his coat. Cancel tomorrow's signing. Freeze every transfer. And find out who that server was at the Avellini. Caleb nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Ethan stared out the window. Chicago glittered below, powerful, deceptive, fragile. He'd nearly lost it all because he'd forgotten one truth. Evil hides best behind good suits and good manners. For the first time that night, he smiled faintly. She risked everything to tell me. I'm not letting that go unanswered. Outside, thunder cracked across the skyline, a sound that felt less like warning and more like justice waking up. The next afternoon, the world outside was bright. Too bright for how heavy Keisha's heart felt. She'd spent the morning waiting for a call that never came. Her nerves tangled with regret. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe rich men like Ethan Cole didn't believe girls from the South Side, no matter how right they were. Then, just as she was tying her apron again for another shift, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Williams, a calm voice said. This is Caleb Moore, assistant to Mr. Cole. He'd like to see you at his office. A car will pick you up in 20 minutes. Her hands froze midair. He wants to see me? Yes, ma'am. And for the record, he's very grateful. The ride to Cole Industries felt unreal. Glass towers shimmered like judgment in the sun. Keisha's thrifted shoes clicked too loudly against the polished marble floor as she followed the receptionist toward the 28th floor. When the elevator opened, Ethan was waiting, no suit, just a gray sweater and tired eyes that still carried authority. Keisha, he said, standing, thank you for coming. She nodded nervously. I didn't mean to cause trouble, sir. I just heard something. He smiled faintly. You did more than that. You saved my company and probably thousands of jobs. You were right about Dean Mathers. His team buried a breach clause. We caught it before signing. Keisha's eyes widened. So it was real? As real as it gets, he said quietly. And if you hadn't spoken, everything I built would have been gone by Monday. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The reality hit her. Her fear, her humiliation, her risk. It all meant something. Ethan stepped closer. I read your file. You're sharp, observant, and brave. I'd like to offer you a position in our ethics and compliance division. Flexible hours, full benefits. You'll help us ensure no one can exploit people like Dean ever again. Her throat tightened. You mean a real job? He nodded. A real future. Tears welled, but she blinked them away. Thank you, sir. For what? He said. For doing the right thing when I didn't have the courage to see it. She smiled, soft but certain. Sometimes it just takes someone listening. The next week, sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of coal industries. The office buzzed softly, keyboards clicking, voices low, energy calm but alive. Keisha walked through the hallway in a navy blazer, her name now printed on a new badge. Keisha Williams, Ethics Compliance Division. She still couldn't believe it. Just days ago, she'd been serving water to men who wouldn't remember her name. Now, she walked among people who paused to greet her with respect. Not pity, respect. In her small corner office, she opened a folder labeled Vendor Accountability Review. Her job, make sure no one ever buried a seat in fine print again. The irony wasn't lost on her. A waitress who once refilled glasses now helped clean out corruption. That evening, Ethan stopped by her office. "How's the first week treating you?" he asked, leaning on the doorway. She smiled. "I'm still learning, but it feels good." "Feels, right?" He nodded. "You earned this, Keisha. Not because of luck, but because you spoke when others stayed silent." She looked down, remembering the coat room, the glass breaking, Bradley's sneer. All of it suddenly felt smaller than this moment. I just didn't want another person to lose everything because nobody said anything. Ethan smiled softly. That kind of courage changes things, not just companies. After he left, she packed her things and stepped outside. The sky had turned gold over Chicago, the city lights beginning to pulse awake. She walked past the Avellini, the restaurant that once made her feel invisible. Through the window, she saw Bradley barking orders at new waitresses. For a moment, their eyes met. He froze. Keisha just smiled, calm, steady, then turned and walked away. Back home, her mother was waiting on the couch, knitting as always. "So, how was work today, baby?" Keisha set her purse down and hugged her tight. "Work was good, Mama. Real good." Her mother chuckled softly. "You look lighter, like you finally exhaled." Keisha smiled. "Maybe I did." She glanced at the skyline through the window, vast, glowing, alive, then whispered to herself, "Justice begins when someone refuses to stay silent." If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.